The hot Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly as Katherine Oaks stepped out of the stagecoach, her emerald eyes squinting against the harsh glare. Tumbleweeds rolled across the dusty main street of Promise Creek, a forgotten speck on the frontier map of 1875. She clutched her medical bag tightly, the weight of responsibility heavy in her gloved hands. At 26, she was the first female doctor many of these people would ever see, and she knew the whispers would start before the dust from the stagecoach settled. "Madam, you must be the new doctor," said the elderly driver as he handed down her trunk. "Town's been waiting on you since Doc Miller passed last winter." Katherine nodded politely, straightening her simple blue traveling dress. "Yes, I'm Dr. Katherine Oaks. I understand there's a clinic prepared." The driver chuckled. "Prepared might be stretching it some, but Sheriff Thompson said to direct you to the building next to the general store, been vacant since the barber moved out." As Katherine walked down the street, she felt the stares. Women whispered behind their hands, men tipped their hats with curious glances. She'd expected this, had faced it through medical school in Philadelphia, but out here, where traditions ran as deep as the nearby creek, she knew winning trust would be her first and hardest battle. The clinic was indeed little more than a dusty room with a table and some shelves. Katherine set her bag down with a sigh. Tomorrow she would clean, organize, and prepare. Tonight she needed rest. The sheriff had arranged a room for her at Mrs. Miller's boarding house, a tidy white building with a small porch at the edge of town. The widow greeted her warmly enough, showing her to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Mrs. Miller informed her. "Most of the boarders are already gathered downstairs." Katherine thanked her and quickly freshened up, splashing water on her face from the basin and repinning her chestnut hair. She'd barely had time to change into a fresh dress when the dinner bell rang. The dining room fell silent as she entered. 4 men and 2 women sat at the long oak table, all eyes turning to her. "Everyone, this is our new doctor," Mrs. Miller announced. "Dr. Katherine Oaks from Philadelphia." A sandy-haired man stood, extending his hand. "Sheriff James Thompson, madam, we're mighty glad you've come." Katherine shook his hand, grateful for the friendly face. The others introduced themselves, Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, who ran the general store, Mr. Lewis, the banker, Mr. Howard, the telegraph operator, and finally, an elderly woman named Miss Abigail, who simply nodded without offering a surname. The conversation over beef stew and cornbread was strained, with questions about her qualifications thinly veiled in polite small talk. "We've never had a lady doctor before," Mr. Peterson remarked. "Must be unusual even back east." "There are more of us every year," Katherine replied evenly. "Medicine benefits from different perspectives." Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat. "Doc Oaks comes highly recommended by her professors. The town council voted unanimously to accept her application." Katherine shot him a grateful glance. She'd faced skepticism before and would again. What mattered was that she was here now, ready to serve a community that desperately needed medical care. After dinner, Sheriff Thompson asked to speak with her privately on the porch. "There's something you should know," he said once they were alone. "We've had some trouble with the Alderson Ranch, about 5 miles outside town. Henry Alderson lost his wife to consumption last year. He's got a boy about 6 years old. They're isolated out there, and Henry refuses to come to town much. The boy could use a checkup, and Henry himself hasn't been right since Sarah passed." Katherine nodded. "I can ride out there tomorrow after I set up the clinic." The sheriff shook his head. "Henry's particular about strangers, especially since Sarah died." "Let me ride out first and tell him about you, maybe in a few days." That night, Katherine lay in her narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier night coyotes howling in the distance, the occasional burst of laughter from the saloon down the street, the creak of the boarding house settling. She'd come west for many reasons. The opportunity to practice medicine independently, to escape the constraints of Eastern society, and to heal the lingering wounds in her own heart after her fiancé had broken their engagement upon learning, she intended to continue practicing medicine after marriage. In the morning, Katherine set to work on her clinic. She scrubbed every surface, organized her medical supplies, and hung her diploma prominently on the wall. By midday, a hesitant knock came at the door. "Doctor?" A woman stood there, holding a small boy whose arm was clearly broken. "Tommy fell from the hayloft. Can you help him?" Katherine smiled reassuringly. "Of course. Please bring him in." As she set the boy's arm, more curious townspeople gathered outside. By day's end, she treated the broken arm, 2 cases of dyspepsia, a logging cut that needed stitches, and examined an expectant mother. Word spread quickly that the lady doctor knew her business, and Katherine felt a small measure of acceptance beginning to form. 4 days later, Sheriff Thompson appeared at her clinic door just as she was closing up. "Doc, I need you to come with me," he said, his expression grave. "It's Henry Alderson's boy, Mathew. He's running a high fever and Henry's beside himself." Katherine grabbed her medical bag. "Of course." "Let me get my horse." "Already saddled and waiting," the sheriff replied. "Henry only agreed to let you come because the boy's so sick. He's not the most welcoming sort." They rode in silence through the golden evening light, the land opening up into rolling hills and grassy plains. The Alderson ranch appeared as the sun began to set, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, smoke curling from the chimney. A tall man emerged as they approached, his face lined with worry and suspicion. Henry Alderson stood rigidly on his porch, hat in hand, dark hair tinged with premature gray at the temples. His blue eyes, bloodshot from worry, assessed Katherine critically as she dismounted. "This is Dr. Oaks," Sheriff Thompson said. "She's come to help Mathew." Henry nodded curtly. "He's inside. Fever started yesterday, been getting worse." Katherine followed him into the cabin. The interior was surprisingly neat but Spartan, with few personal touches. A small boy lay on a bed in the corner, his cheeks flushed with fever, golden brown hair damp with sweat. "Hello, Mathew," Katherine said softly, setting her bag down. "I'm Dr. Oaks. I'm going to help you feel better." The boy's eyes fluttered open, revealing the same blue as his father's. "Are you an angel like Mama?" he whispered. Katherine's heart clenched. "No, sweetheart, I'm a doctor." "May I examine you?" As she checked the boy's symptoms, she noted the telltale rash spreading across his chest, scarlet fever, serious but treatable if caught early enough. "Mr. Alderson, Mathew has scarlet fever," she explained. "I need to bring the fever down and ensure he stays hydrated. I'll need cool water, clean cloths, and someone needs to prepare willow bark tea." Henry stared at her for a long moment, then nodded and went to get the water. For the next several hours, Katherine worked tirelessly to bring Mathew's fever down, spooning broth and medicinal tea into the boy when he was conscious enough to swallow. Sheriff Thompson left after the first hour, promising to return the next day. Henry remained a silent sentinel, following Katherine's instructions without comment but watching her every move with guarded eyes. Near midnight, the fever finally broke. Mathew fell into a peaceful sleep, and Katherine sat back in exhaustion. "He'll need careful watching for the next few days," she told Henry. "The danger isn't past, but he's responding well." Henry nodded, then suddenly seemed to notice her fatigue. "You should rest. There's coffee on the stove." The coffee was strong and bitter, but Katherine welcomed it. As she sipped, she glanced around the cabin more carefully. A small table with 3 chairs stood near the kitchen area. A shelf held a few books, and beside Mathew's bed, she noticed drawings pinned to the wall, a child's simple renderings of horses, a house, stick figures. "He likes to draw," Henry said, following her gaze. His voice was deep but quiet, as if unused to conversation. "Gets that from his mother. She used to sketch." Katherine nodded. "He's talented for his age." Henry almost smiled. "Almost. Sarah used to say the same." They sat in silence until Katherine checked on Mathew again, relieved to find his fever still down, his breathing easier. Dawn was approaching, pale light beginning to filter through the cabin windows. You should get some rest, Mr. Alderson, Katherine suggested. I'll watch Mathew. Henry hesitated, clearly torn between exhaustion and reluctance to leave his son's side. I'll wake you if there's any change, she promised. Finally, he nodded and stretched out on his own bed across the room, though Katherine suspected he wouldn't truly sleep. The next few days fell into a pattern. Katherine divided her time between the cabin and the front porch, where she could get fresh air while still hearing Mathew if he called out. Henry seemed to soften incrementally, his one-word responses occasionally expanding into full sentences. On the third day, when Mathew was well enough to sit up and eat solid food, Henry actually thanked her. Not many doctors would ride out this far for so long, he said as they sat on the porch while Mathew napped. Katherine shrugged. It's my duty. Besides, Mathew is a wonderful patient. He's a good boy, Henry agreed, and for the first time Katherine saw genuine warmth in his eyes. Too good for this place sometimes. It's beautiful land, Katherine observed, looking out at the rolling hills and distant mountains. Henry followed her gaze. Sarah thought so too. Said it was wide open enough for dreams to grow. The bitterness in his voice surprised her. Dreams don't last out here, though. Before Katherine could respond, Sheriff Thompson rode up, bringing supplies from town and news that several more children had developed symptoms of scarlet fever. I need to get back, Katherine said, concern evident in her voice. Mathew is past the worst, but you must continue the willow bark tea 3 times daily and watch for any return of fever. Henry nodded, his expression closing off again. We'll manage. Katherine gathered her things, suddenly reluctant to leave. Mathew cried when she told him goodbye, and even Henry seemed momentarily lost for words. Thank you, he finally said as he helped her onto her horse. For my son. I'll check on him in a few days, she promised, and rode away with the sheriff. The next week was a blur as Katherine fought the small scarlet fever outbreak in Promise Creek. 5 children fell ill, but thankfully, all recovered. By the time she had a chance to think about the Alderson ranch again, 10 days had passed. She rode out alone this time, following the trail she remembered. As the ranch came into view, she saw Henry in the corral, working with a chestnut mare. He looked up at her approach, shading his eyes with one hand. Doctor, he called, sounding neither pleased nor displeased to see her. I came to check on Mathew, she explained as she dismounted. Henry nodded toward the house. He's inside, drawing. He'll be happy to see you. Mathew was indeed delighted, rushing to hug her legs when she entered. Dr. Kate, I drew you a picture. Katherine knelt to his level, smiling. Did you? I'd love to see it. The boy ran to the table and returned with a piece of paper, proudly displaying his artwork. It's you making me better, he explained, pointing to the stick figures. One wore a dress and held what appeared to be a doctor's bag while a smaller figure lay in bed. It's wonderful, Mathew, she said sincerely. You're very talented, the boy beamed. Papa says I draw just like Mama did. He keeps all my pictures. Katherine examined Mathew carefully and was pleased to find him fully recovered, no trace of the rash remaining. As she was finishing her examination, Henry entered with a pail of fresh milk. He's doing excellently, Katherine reported. You took very good care of him. A hint of pride crossed Henry's face. He's strong, like his mother. After examining Mathew, Katherine found herself invited to stay for lunch, a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and fresh milk. The conversation flowed more easily this time, with Mathew chattering happily about his drawings and the new foal in the barn. Would you like to see her? Henry asked unexpectedly as they finished eating. Katherine smiled. I'd love to. The 3 of them walked to the barn where a wobbly-legged foal nursed from its mother. Mathew slipped into the stall fearlessly, stroking the foal's soft coat. He's good with the animals, Henry remarked, a note of pride in his voice. Like his father, I imagine, Katherine replied. Henry gave her a sidelong glance. Sarah used to say that too. When it came time for Katherine to leave, Mathew insisted on giving her another drawing, this one of the foal. Henry walked her to her horse, holding the reins as she mounted. You're welcome to visit again, he said, the words seeming to surprise even him. For Mathew's sake, he doesn't get much company, Katherine nodded. I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, Katherine found reasons to ride out to the Alderson ranch every few days. Sometimes she brought books for Mathew or supplies from town. Each visit, she noticed small changes in the cabin curtains hung at the windows, wildflowers in a jar on the table, more of Mathew's drawings displayed on the walls. Henry gradually opened up, sharing stories about the ranch, his plans for expanding the small herd of cattle, even occasionally mentioning Sarah. Katherine learned they had met in Kansas, where Sarah had been a schoolteacher. They'd come to Wyoming territory 5 years ago, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. She wanted more children, he confided one evening as they sat on the porch after Mathew had gone to bed. Said Mathew needed brothers and sisters. Katherine heard the pain in his voice. She sounds like she was a wonderful mother. Henry nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The best, after we lost her, I didn't know how to go on if it hadn't been for Mathew. Children give us purpose, Katherine agreed, thinking of her own patients in town. They need us to be strong. Henry turned to look at her. Is that why you became a doctor, to help children? Katherine smiled. Partly. I've always been drawn to healing. My father was a doctor, and he let me help in his practice from the time I was old enough to hold bandages. When I told him I wanted to attend medical school, he supported me, even though many thought it inappropriate. Must have been hard, Henry observed. Being different, it was, Katherine admitted, but worth it. A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, a coyote howled, and Henry's dog answered with a low growl from beneath the porch. Why Promise Creek? He finally asked. A doctor from Philadelphia could practice anywhere, Katherine sighed. I wanted somewhere I could make a real difference. And she hesitated, then decided on honesty. I was engaged back east. He decided he didn't want a wife who practiced medicine, said it would embarrass him in society, so I left. Henry's expression hardened. Sounds like a fool. Katherine laughed softly. Yes, well, sometimes it takes a fool to show us where we truly belong. As summer progressed into autumn, Katherine's visits to the Alderson ranch became a regular part of her life. In town, people began to notice and gossip flourished. Mrs. Miller tactfully mentioned that a respectable woman might want to be careful about spending too much time alone with a widower, however innocent the circumstances. Katherine brushed off the concerns. Her friendship with Henry and Mathew was important to her, and she refused to let small-town gossip interfere. Still, she couldn't deny that her feelings for Henry were growing more complex. She found herself thinking of him during the day, wondering what he would say about certain things, admiring his quiet strength and devotion to his son. For his part, Henry seemed to look forward to her visits. He began timing his trips to town on clinic days, bringing Mathew for checkups that were clearly unnecessary. Once, he brought her a bouquet of wildflowers, awkwardly explaining that Mathew had picked them, though the boy's surprised expression suggested otherwise. In late September, Katherine arrived at the ranch to find it unusually quiet. She tied her horse to the hitching post and called out but received no answer. Concerned, she approached the cabin and knocked on the door. When there was still no response, she cautiously entered. The cabin was empty, but nothing seemed amiss. She was about to leave when she heard a sound from the barn. Following it, she found Henry sitting alone on a hay bale, his head in his hands. In his lap was one of Mathew's drawings. "Henry," she said softly. He looked up, startled. His eyes were red, his face wet with tears he hadn't bothered to wipe away. "Katherine," he said hoarsely, "I didn't hear you ride up." She moved closer, concerned. "What's wrong? Where's Mathew?" "With Mrs. Peterson in town. I needed to be alone." Katherine sat beside him on the hay bale. "Is there anything I can do?" Henry shook his head, then after a moment, silently handed her the drawing. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall man, a smaller woman with what appeared to be a doctor's bag, and a small boy between them. Above it, in a child's careful printing, were the words, "Us three someday." Catherine's heart caught in her throat. "Oh, he drew it last night," Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. "Asked me if you were going to be his new mama." Catherine didn't know what to say. I'm sorry if that made you uncomfortable." Henry looked at her, his blue eyes intense. "It didn't make me uncomfortable. It made me realize how much I've been denying." "Denying?" He stood abruptly, turning away from her. "After Sarah died, I swore I'd never let anyone else in. It hurt too much to lose her. I told myself Mathew and I would be fine alone." He turned back, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "But then you rode in with Thompson that day and everything started to change." Catherine stood as well, her heart pounding. "Henry." "I don't have any right to ask," he continued. "You're educated, cultured. You could have any man in town. Why would you want a broken-down rancher with a 6-year-old boy?" Catherine stepped closer to him. "Because that rancher is the strongest, kindest man I've ever known. Because his son has captured my heart with his drawings and his sweet spirit. Because when I'm here, I feel like I'm home." Henry's expression softened with wonder. "Do you mean that?" "I do," Catherine said simply. "I love Mathew, and I love you, Henry Alderson." Henry reached out slowly as if afraid she might disappear and touched her face. "I never thought I could feel this way again. After Sarah, I thought that part of me was dead. And now," Catherine whispered, "now I know it wasn't dead, just waiting for you." When Henry kissed her, it felt like coming home. His arms were strong around her, his lips gentle but insistent. Catherine melted into the embrace, her heart soaring with unexpected joy. They broke apart at the sound of a wagon approaching. Henry kept his arm around her waist as they walked out of the barn to see Mrs. Peterson bringing Mathew home. The boy jumped down from the wagon and ran to them, stopping short when he saw them standing so close together, his eyes wide with hope. "Mathew," Henry said, kneeling down to his son's level, "Dr. Catherine and I have something to talk to you about." "Is it about my drawing?" the boy asked. "I wasn't supposed to show you yet." Henry smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Yes, it's about your drawing, about us three. Someday." Mathew asked hopefully. Catherine knelt beside Henry. "How would you feel if someday started very soon?" The boy's face lit up and he threw his arms around both of them. "I knew it. I knew you'd be my new mama, Mrs. Peterson tactfully took her leave after Henry thanked her for watching Mathew, her knowing smile suggesting the town gossip would soon take a new, more concrete turn. That evening, as the three of them sat at the table sharing a meal, Catherine felt a sense of rightness she'd never experienced before. This was where she belonged, not just in Promise Creek, but here, with this man and this child who had somehow become essential to her happiness. "We should get married before winter sets in," Henry said as they sat on the porch after Mathew was asleep. "The passes can get snowed in and I want you here with us when that happens." Catherine smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Are you asking me to marry you, Henry Alderson?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Katherine Oaks, I never thought I'd love again after Sarah, but you brought light back into our lives. Will you marry me, be Mathew's mother, and make this ranch a real home again?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They were married in the Promise Creek Church on a crisp October morning. The entire town turned out, most of them having come around to the idea of their lady doctor marrying the solitary rancher. Sheriff Thompson stood as Henry's best man, and Mrs. Miller, who had become a friend to Catherine, was her matron of honor. But it was Mathew, proudly bearing the rings, who stole the show with his beaming face. After the ceremony, as guests gathered at the hotel for a small reception, Henry pulled Catherine aside, slipping something into her hand. "Mathew made this for you," he said softly. It was another drawing, but more detailed than his previous efforts. It showed the three of them in front of the cabin, with the mountains in the background. Beneath it, in Mathew's improving penmanship, were the words, "Us three today and forever." Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes. "It's perfect. Just like you," Henry murmured, kissing her softly. "Our someday is today." 5 years later, the Alderson ranch had prospered. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house. The herd had tripled in size, and the family had grown as well. 3-year-old Sarah, named for the mother she would never meet, but whose memory was honored in the household, toddled across the yard, chasing butterflies while her older brother supervised. Katherine stood on the porch, her hand resting on her swollen belly where their third child grew. In town, she still maintained the clinic 3 days a week, having trained a young assistant who handled minor cases when she couldn't be there. The community had fully embraced her, both as their doctor and as Henry Alderson's wife. Henry emerged from the barn, his face lighting up at the sight of his family. As he walked toward them, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here from the constraints of Philadelphia society to the freedom of the Wyoming frontier, from the heartbreak of a broken engagement to the joy of a love that had healed not just Henry and Mathew, but her own heart as well. Henry reached the porch, kissing her softly before bending to kiss her belly as well. "How are my girls today?" Katherine smiled. "We're fine. Though your son thinks this one's going to be another boy," Henry laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Boy or girl doesn't matter, as long as they're healthy and as beautiful as their mama." As the Wyoming sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant orange and pink, Katherine looked at the drawings now framed on the wall inside their home, a chronicle of their family's growth and Mathew's improving artistic skills. The first one, "Us Three Someday," held a place of honor. What had begun with tears over a child's drawing had blossomed into a love that sustained them through the challenges of frontier life. Together, they had built the someday Mathew had envisioned, a family bound by love, stronger for having known loss, and grateful for each day they had together. As Henry held her close on the porch, watching their children play in the golden evening light, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the hearts of the man and children she loved. "What are you thinking?" Henry asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Katherine smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I'm thinking that someday turned out even better than we could have imagined." Henry's arms tightened around her. "It's only the beginning," he promised. "We have a lifetime of somedays ahead of us." And in the gathering twilight, surrounded by the family that fate and love had given her, Katherine knew it was true. Their someday had become today, and it was more beautiful than she had ever dared to dream.